Good evening. Welcome to It's About Freedom. Tonight we're going to be interviewing 5 gubernatorial candidates for Oregon's governor's election. Unfortunately, John Kitzhaber cannot be here. He doesn't want to do any more joint appearances this year. However, we do have the Republican candidate, Bill Sizemore, the Reform Party candidate, Roger Widener, Libertarian Party candidate, Richard Burke, Socialist Party candidate, Trey Smith, and Pacific Party candidate, Blair Barbiev. So we'll just start out with a 2-minute summary, 2-minute presentation of each person, of reasons to vote for them for governors. Blair?
Well, thank you. My name is Blair Barbiev. I'm the Pacific Party candidate for governor. The Pacific Party is an independent political party that was started here in Oregon by Oregonians. We're affiliated with the Green Party, which has a presence both nationally and internationally. In 1996, our presidential candidate was Ralph Nader. And right now, I think one of the things we're most concerned about is protecting the health, the security, the economic security, and the environmental health of all Oregonians. We're particularly concerned about protecting drinking water, most of which comes from forests, which we all own, our national public forest. And our incumbent governor has done absolutely nothing to protect our drinking water and to protect our forests, and in many ways he's made things worse. The forests produce some of the purest, cleanest water in the world, and this is critical and vital to a number of industries in Oregon. Fishing depends on this clean water. It's a billion-dollar industry with 60,000 jobs here in Oregon. High-tech industries depend on clean water, in addition to just using it as our drinking water. And tourism and recreation are huge industries here in Oregon, all which depend on trees standing and clean water. I support ballot measure 64. It is not too extreme. Cutting 96% of our ancient forests is extreme. We've seen what happens through clear cutting and road building in our forests that leads to landslides, it leads to flooding, and it led, unfortunately, to the death of 5 Oregonians. In 1996, we had 200-year floods, which also led to the contamination of drinking water in the cities of Salem and Kaiser. We also support the National Forest Protection and Restoration Act to take the money that we're losing because we, the taxpayers, subsidize the timber industry. $88 million a year we're losing on timber sales by the government's own estimates. Another issue, of course, is civil liberties and our freedom. Governor Kitzhaber signed a bill to recriminalize possession of small amounts of marijuana, and I have a feeling I'm running out of time.
You get about another 10 seconds.
Okay. Governor Kitzhaber signed a bill to recriminalize possession of small amounts of marijuana. This will cost an additional $1.2 million and subject another 200,000 Oregonians to potential imprisonment and their homes, cars to forfeiture. I'm opposed to ballot measure 57. I support ballot measure 67, and now I'm probably out of time.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Trey?
My name is Trey Smith, and I'm the gubernatorial candidate for the Socialist Party of Oregon. The Socialist Party has been around since 1901, and I guess the reason to vote for me is that there is no other candidate in this race, nor any other political party in the state of Oregon, that has the courage to challenge the logic of capitalism. All the other candidates up here accept capitalism as a given, and their policies and strategies emanate from that. From the socialist perspective, capitalism is amoral and unethical. And rather than give you a laundry list of all the different things that we support, that's what this show is about. And so as we go throughout this show, I think you will get a very clear understanding of where the Socialist Party agenda lies and our different vision for the people of Oregon.
Okay. Your turn. Richard?
Hi, my name is Richard Burke, and I'm the Libertarian candidate for governor this year. I'm running for governor to give you the chance to vote for someone who is both fiscally conservative yet socially tolerant. Like many conservatives, I support low taxes, minimal regulation, and charter schools, public schools which provide parents an alternative to the traditional school system. Like many liberals, I support Oregon's Death with Dignity Act, medicinal marijuana, and the right of a woman to choose an abortion during the first 2 trimesters of her pregnancy. I want to provide voters with a way out of the Republican-Democratic dilemma which forces you to choose between your money and your personal freedoms. We need government to protect us and to safeguard our rights. I do not hate government, but to the greatest extent possible, I would like to get government out of your pocketbooks and your private lives. Regardless of the election outcome, I'm out to affect public policy. To that end, I'm the only candidate who has released a complete state budget for the consideration of every state legislator before the next legislative session. While protecting education, transportation, and public safety, my budget cuts $3.5 billion off of John Kitzhaber's last recommended budget. This will allow us to have an income tax decrease of 20 to 40%. To promote my budget and my policies, I have personally campaigned in 49 Oregon cities in all 36 Oregon counties. Senate President Brady Adams and several state legislators have already requested copies of my budget for their consideration.
30 seconds.
If you're a Republican or Democrat who is unhappy with your party's nominee, consider voting for me as an alternative. If you want to tell Salem that you are overtaxed, let them know by voting for me. If you're an independent or non-affiliated voter, consider voting for me as a way to show you want more choices in politics. I am your only fiscally conservative, yet socially tolerant choice. So a vote for me is a vote for political innovation and well invested.
Fine.
Thank you.
Very good. Roger?
Thank you, Ron. Yes, my name is Roger Widener, and I'm the Reform Party candidate for governor. I was born and raised in Portland, Oregon. I went through college and law school as a Portland City fireman. I'm running for governor to restore to the citizens of this state their constitutionally guaranteed rights to equal protection of the law and due process of law. 22 years ago, I ran the Consumer Fraud Department in the District Attorney's Office. For the last 10 years, I've been the state director of the Constitutional Defenders, a national organization committed to restoring to the citizens of this state and this country their constitutional rights to due process and equal protection of the law. What I have come to realize in the last 10 years is that citizens are having their children, their property, lands taken from them by corrupt attorneys, judges, and bureaucrats in sham judicial proceedings. I have been stunned to the point of disbelief what I have seen over the last 10 years. Ron Green here has had many of those victims on his program and you've been able to hear their horror stories. I tell people all that a courtroom is a place to make a public record. We have an adversary system, a plaintiff and a defendant and a neutral judge. And what I'm seeing over and over again is that people, when they have their children or their lands taken, they cannot get into that courtroom and to have their cases heard by a jury as the law provides. I think the core of this problem is our judicial system. I'm in favor of creating the Oregon Judicial Council, which would be made up of lay people to oversee attorneys and judges. I'm also in favor of abolishing SOSCF because of its abusive practices, and to abolish Senate Bill 100 LCDC because of its abusive practices.
Okay. Bill?
Hello everyone, I'm Bill Sizemore and I'm the Republican nominee for governor. I am married, I have 5 wonderful children, and in my real life I work as the executive director of Oregon Taxpayers United, which is a 19,000 member statewide taxpayer organization which puts measures on the ballot to do things like make government more efficient and to reduce your taxes. A lot of politicians run for office saying that they are going to make government more efficient, they're going to cut waste, and they say that they're going to also cut taxes. I'm probably one of the few people in the state of Oregon who can actually say that, make that claim, and do it with credibility. For the past 5 years, that's exactly what I've been doing. In fact, most people out there in Oregon, as a result of the work of our organization, myself, and friends, most people in Oregon are paying half in property taxes of what they would be paying if it wasn't for our efforts. Ballot measures 5, 47, 50 that have reduced taxes and limited the growth of taxes on everyday people, enabling a lot of elderly people to stay in their homes. I am running for governor because I offer an alternative not only to these gentlemen but also to John Kitzhaber. John Kitzhaber is a governor who has been awarded the designation as America's most fiscally liberal governor because of his tax and spend policies, increasing state spending 41% in a 4-year period, proposing $1 billion in new taxes. John Kitzhaber has proposed keeping the people's kicker, their income tax refunds. He's proposed a 9-cent per gallon increase in gas taxes. He's proposed doubling or tripling vehicle registration fees, a new telephone tax added to everyone's telephone bill, an odometer tax, so you're taxed for the miles you drive your car. I believe Oregonians are paying enough money already for first-class schools, roads, and parks, etc. And I will give you the kind of government that will deliver to the taxpayers good services for the money they're already paying. Thank you.
Okay, great. And that kind of leads us into the first question, just talking about taxes. I'd like to know from everybody, do you feel that state taxes in Oregon are too high, too low, and how would you go about lowering them? Or what taxes would you raise if you think they should be raised? And we'll let you start out with the first answer there.
Okay, great. Well, taxes is an issue I like to talk about. Not only property taxes, but income taxes. I believe the Oregon income tax is too high. It's among the highest in the country. There's two things I propose that we do right away to it. One of them is to change the brackets. Currently in Oregon, you pay the highest income tax rate of 9% if you make $5,000 of personal income. $5,000 your taxes if you're rich. You pay the highest rate. And I propose that we raise the brackets so people don't pay the highest rate of income tax till they get up to the $40,000 or $50,000 range. And I also propose that we make 100% of people's federal income taxes deductible on your state income tax return, so you're not paying state income taxes on your federal income taxes. John Kitzhaber opposes both of those proposals, but I think they are in the best interest of everyday working people.
Okay, and let's see, in 30 seconds, Roger?
Yeah. Well, I'm in favor of the single tax or the flat tax, which would be factored right into any product that you buy, and by doing that, eliminating the income tax and also the property taxes. The property taxes are driving people out of their homes, particularly elderly people. It's a very complicated business. It makes a lot of money for accountants, CPAs, and attorneys, and I think with you have a flat tax, a single tax that taxes your gross income, that is the most fair and equitable tax we could have.
Okay. Richard?
Well, one thing that Bill Sizemore and I agree on is that taxes are too high and they need to be brought down. One of the things I've proposed to do this is a result of the budget I have released. It will allow us to lower income taxes between 20 to 40%, depending on certain issues and nuances having to do with federal matching fees and so on. But there's more we need to do than just reduce income taxes. We also need to deal with the property tax. And so I'm the only candidate in this race who has proposed completely replacing property taxes with a capped 5% sales tax. Part of this sales tax would be levied by local governments, thereby restoring local control, and the rest would be levied by the state.
Okay. Jay?
Well, the question of taxes is, for the poor and working class, they're too high, and for the wealthy, they're too low. I was up on the web, and I looked at the Office of Economic Analysis, and their forecast for September indicated that for every $1 you and I pay in state income taxes, the wealthy corporations of Oregon, the Intels, the Tektronics, pay 8.7 cents. That's a vulgar ratio of 11.5 to 1. So one of the plans of the Socialist Party is to raise the corporate income tax rate, basically double it, but have it progressive, and to also have the personal income tax rate more progressive.
Okay, thank you.
I think what we need to do is shift our taxation and shift it from goods and services to bads and pollution. We need a pollution tax. Right now, people can pollute, and it pays to pollute. So the Pacific Party and I advocate pollution taxes. That's one way that we can shift taxation from individuals, as Trey has pointed out, who are overtaxed, to corporations who are undertaxed. I disagree with Bill Sizemore. I think that the tax measures that we've had have made things tougher on individuals and have made it easier on some very wealthy corporations. And I disagree with Richard. I think a sales tax is ridiculous, and most people have opposed it in Oregon and will continue to.
Okay. On this round, I'm going to expand the time out to 50 seconds because I'm seeing that 30 isn't quite enough to give a real good answer, so we're going to expand that out to 50-second answers. And okay, there's a second part to that question, and let's see, this time we'll start out with Trey and then work around the other way, just keep it varying a little bit. Although I think you just answered that, so no, I'm going to skip that one. We're going to go down to another one. I'm going to go down to a moral issue, and that is abortion and partial birth abortion in particular. How do you feel about that issue, and what is your stand on abortion and partial birth abortion?
My stand on abortion is that it is a question between a woman and her doctor, period.
That's it?
That's it.
Okay, go ahead.
This is one of those issues that is more than just laws. It also has to deal with emotions, very personal beliefs, and I think it's difficult to pass any single law to just cover something like that. I think the only laws you can pass are those where there is some kind of consensus in the community. And to that end, I support keeping an abortion safe and legal during the first 2 trimesters of a woman's pregnancy. I do oppose 3rd trimester abortions because I think you're talking about questions of viability at that point, and certainly partial birth abortions. But I will say this: no abortion should be funded with tax dollars. If someone in the 1st or 2nd trimester of their pregnancy wants an abortion, they should finance it themselves or go to the man who impregnated her, if they know who it is, and pay for that privately. There should be no public funding of actions like abortion or assisted suicide.
Okay. Roger?
Well, I am definitely opposed to partial birth abortions. I would say that no abortions after the 1st trimester period, and that there should be no funding by the state or the encouragement of abortions. And of course it gets into a much bigger problem, abortions do, with what they're doing in schools, teaching contraception courses. They're introducing this subject, and that's what I have the greatest difficulty with. But my position is abortions, no abortions after the 1st trimester, and no partial birth abortion.
Okay. Bill?
I am unapologetically pro-life. I believe that abortion is wrong, and I believe a woman should have the right to choose whether she gets pregnant or not. But after a woman is pregnant, I do not support abortion. I oppose partial birth abortions automatically, therefore, and I oppose government or taxpayer funding of abortion. I know this is a very emotional issue, and I know a lot of good, sincere people on both sides of it, but I've given it a lot of thought over my lifetime, and I have decided I am clearly pro-life, unapologetically so. Though I would point out that the state has very little to say about the issue of abortion. The office of governor has very little to say about abortion, that most of the authority for making decisions regarding abortion lies with the U.S. Supreme Court and not with state government.
Okay. Thank you. Now, a follow-up question.
Actually, Blair didn't get a
last
chance to talk.
response.
I'm sorry. Blair,
all right.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think it's kind of silly that there's 6 men up here discussing what to do with a woman's body, and I'd like to see women discussing this for a change. Women have been controlling their bodies and their fertility cycles since time immemorial. They will continue to do so. It's not something I don't think that men or government should necessarily have a role in. I think what we can all work together on, and I think what people would all like to agree, is that we'd like to see fewer abortions or none at all, but that doesn't mean the state should be denying women that access. And so I think I quite disagree with Roger, and I think that we need to have family planning and contraception and sex education and do all that we can to make abortions something that doesn't happen, but not something that we should outlaw.
Thank you very much. And now a follow-up question that's closely related to that is doctor-assisted suicide. And it's kind of a 2-part question. How do you feel about doctor-assisted suicide? And do you believe the state should provide Medicare funding for doctor-assisted suicide? Should the state be involved in helping people to pay for it? And do you oppose the notion entirely? Roger, you lead off at this one.
Well, I'm fundamentally opposed to any kind of government assisting people to commit suicide. I think that nature has its ways of operating. I think that people that you should not go to great lengths to prolong life. That's where I think that the line ought to be drawn. But as far as the state coming in, once you create that license, what I've seen with the abuse in this system, I'm so skeptical of anything that the government gets involved in. There's talk about doing this to eliminate people who are a drag on the government because of the expenses that are involved. So I'm against state-funded.
Okay, and there's a second part to that question, so I'm going to hold that for a separate question, and we'll just all go on the notion of doctor-assisted suicide, and then the second question will come around and ask about state funding. So just the question of doctor-assisted suicide, if you would.
Okay, me? Okay.
Yes.
This is one place where libertarians and conservatives sometimes disagree. Your body is your own, and I think if you're going to talk about property rights, what is the ultimate property right, if not a person's own life? I think a person should decide when they are ready to die, particularly if they have a terminal illness. And to that end, I support the idea of doctor-assisted suicide. But as is the case with abortion, I do not believe it is the purpose of government or taxpayers to fund the personal choices of others. And so I would also oppose government funding of doctor-assisted suicide, although I do support a person's right to make that choice.
Okay, very good. Trey?
Well, I agree with my colleague here, Mr. Burke. I voted for assisted suicide. I believe, once again, as with my answer with abortion, it's between a person and their doctor. And in this case, also between the person, their family, and the doctor. And I fully believe that the government should fund it, because if not, only the rich will be able to exercise their right. We need equal access. And so if this is a decision that has been thought well through and made by the person involved, and this person is poor, the government should help fund it as they would with any other type of health care situation.
Okay, very good. I guess everybody's going to answer both questions, so go ahead, Blair.
Sure. I basically agree with my colleague to the right, if I can say that. It's the ultimate decision that an individual can make. I think the government has absolutely no business operating in people's private affairs like that, and how one chooses to live one's life or how one chooses to end one's life should be done without interference of the government. And in terms of funding, I'd have to agree with Trey. I would like to see universal health care. It works in Canada. It's much cheaper right now. There are parasites called insurance companies that make a boatload of money off of all of us. And there's ways to have funding and health care be more efficient, more effective, and available for everyone. And I'd like to see all forms of health care, all forms of treatment available to everyone, regardless of wealth.
Okay, thank you. Bill?
I realize this is a very difficult issue for people, and when someone's in pain and they're dying slowly and miserably, the last thing you want is government telling them how they're going to end their life one way or the other. However, I want to make it clear, I did not support doctor-assisted suicide. I don't want government sanctioning killing people. However, the voters have already spoken on the issue, and they've spoken on it twice. Even though personally I oppose doctor-assisted suicide, I will uphold the will of the voters. Hopefully another time down the road, Oregon voters will change their mind about the issue. But as a leader, it's not my job to ram my views down the throats of the people. They've spoken, and I will uphold their views, though I believe that piece of legislation was a mistake.
Okay, thank you. Now I want to ask kind of a follow-up question on that, and this is something that concerns me. In light of the way, in my opinion, the government doesn't, we've had such things as Waco, we've had Ruby Ridge, you can all name your own, I'm sure you have your own examples in the back of your head, Oklahoma City, and what some people believe was not a very good thorough investigation. You had the Inspector General investigated the FBI and found out their investigations unit was cooking the books to favor the prosecution all the time. And if the state starts funding assisted suicides, what is the chance or the probability, or what is the guarantee that they won't start thinking of money before they think of the patient? Why wouldn't they yield to that temptation? It's a very speculative question, but I think it's something you have to look down the road and ask. What's to stop them from saying to somebody, or saying, you know, this person, your quality of life isn't very high, and you're really taking up space that somebody else needs. You know, why wouldn't you want to commit suicide and end it now? I mean, I really see a real danger there. And it has happened. It happened in Nazi Germany, and to think that we in the U.S. are somehow special and that can never happen here. And I wasn't going to intrude, but I will just admit that I think it could be very naive. So could you all just address that issue, and then we'll go on to the, yes, you first.
That is a danger, and that's something I acknowledge. But what you have to ask yourself is a fundamental question: who controls a person's life? You may also ask this about the military draft. Does the government have the right to extract you from your life and potentially dispose of your life for its own ends. I think that if you're going to be consistent about an issue like this, you have to make sure that each person takes responsibility for their own life. And I think the biggest thing that will prevent that is that most people want to live. I want to live. My grandparents want to live. Most people I know want to live. And I think the Death with Dignity Act does provide safeguards against that type of abuse. And I think that we just have to be very careful. It's an ongoing process. You must always stay vigilant. I think that's what our founders said, is that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. And that applies for this issue, too.
Okay. Trey?
I think this goes to a more fundamental question, and that's more this question of what is government. You know, it's been very popular these days to say big government, bad government. You know, what the Socialist Party is talking about is good government. Government is supposed to be of, by, and for the people. And actually, the government we have now that is controlled by the corporate interests, you know, you actually might have a point. There's something I might want to worry about, you know. You know, they might have a few of us peons that they'd like to get rid of. But I think that if, you know, we reinvent this idea of government, of citizen participation, I really don't see this as a problem, because I don't think that our neighbors, I don't think that Blair and Richard will get together and say, you know, we don't like Trey as this gubernatorial candidate, let's get rid of him. I think that people are more rational and more interested in preserving life than that. So I really don't see that as much of a worry or a concern.
Thank you.
Well, I think I'm more concerned, Ron, about some of the things you mentioned earlier, like Ruby Ridge and Waco, where the government uses incredible amounts of force and overkill and kills civilians, all to carry out a specific agenda. And I think we have a reckless government that operates nationally and internationally. Bill Clinton just violated international law and a whole variety of ethics and rules and considerations to bomb what was suspected to be a terrorist camp, which later they back off and say, gee, maybe they were making pharmaceuticals after all. So I think, sure, we have reasons to be concerned about the government. I'm less concerned about doctors and hospitals, though I notice a lot of people die in hospitals and around doctors. That's just a joke. But again, I think it's just a matter of people taking charge of their own lives and looking at the notion of what is government. And I believe in good government, limited government, local government. Citizens should control things.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm out of time.
Bill?
Actually, I'm glad you brought this up as a follow-up question, because it really does focus on my probably second major objection to doctor-assisted suicide. I mean, the idea of allowing a person to make their own decision as to whether they're going to die, you make a case for that. But what that does is put you on a very slippery slope that goes straight downhill. Because if you are mentally capable of making that decision, okay, you are individual, you're a free person, you've made that decision. But what about a person who's suffering just as much, but is not mentally capable of making that decision? Well, the next logical step for some would be then we'll have to let a judge decide whether a doctor will assist that person in dying. And since they can't administer the drug themselves, the doctor can do it. And pretty soon we reach the point, sliding down that slope, to where government has actually taken upon itself the authority to kill people who they believe are suffering or their life is not worthwhile. There were warnings about this, there have been for decades, that this slope was very slippery. I think Oregonians have stepped onto that slope, and I believe it was a mistake, and I am afraid of where that eventually leads.
Roger?
Well, I agree with what Bill said about this stepping on this slope, and what I see is a culture, this culture of corruption that's going on in our government right now. And what they're taught, and when you have corruption, it's always about money. And these people get into these situations where they're at the end of their life, they become a financial burden, whether to an HMO or whatever it is. And it's so much easier to just get rid of them if you have this doctor-assisted, under the guise of a doctor-assisted suicide. So I'm opposed to it for that reason. I just do not believe that you can turn this turn on this faucet and start that program going. I think the consequences are too Orwellian as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. And since we're on this subject, I think the next thing to go to is bureaucracies and power. Do the bureaucracies in our state have too much control over the citizens' lives. I mean, in the sense of police powers, to the extent that a bureaucrat can come in and take your children away from you. You can't see them again. Without, you lose a lot of your rights in front of, I mean, children, just an example, children do have to be protected from abuse, but parents have to be protected from abuse also from the state. You can use your own example, land use planning. Some people feel like their land has been stolen from them. How would you people go about making sure that that doesn't happen, that the bureaucracies stay within their constitutional guidelines? And I'm not sure where, I think it's Blair's turn to lead off with this one.
Okay. I think the most daunting bureaucracy, or the biggest power in government or in the state, resides with the police. They're the ones that have guns. They're the ones that have the power to arrest and imprison people. And what I'd like to see is the establishment of independent civilian review boards monitoring police actions. In Portland, fortunately not very recently, but we've seen a whole, well, actually, no, I'll take that back. Recently, the Portland police have used bean bags, or supposedly non-lethal bean bags, on people who were protesting non-violently in the streets of Portland, protesting police actions, and then the police come and clamp down on this. I think we need an independent civilian review board to monitor police actions. In terms of other bureaucracies, it's a very vague term, and it goes all over the place. I worked in the bureaucracy for a little bit. I worked in the Department of Environmental Quality, and that's why I think pollution taxes work best to get around the bureaucracy.
Okay, thank you. Trey?
I actually, feeding off of what Blair said, I think it's really too general of a question. You have to look at the specific agency you're talking about. You have to look at the specific program. I mean, bureaucracy is one of these nebulous terms that we use all the time. Anytime something happens that you don't like, well, it's the bureaucracy's fault. As to children's services, I was a child abuse investigator in Arkansas and Missouri, and I was one of those people, Roger, that took people's children out of their homes. And do I think that we had too much power? No, because most of the kids that we took out of people's homes because they were neglecting or sexually molesting or beating them were returned by the courts. So in that case, I think the bureaucracy didn't have enough power. But anyway, I guess the summation and the bottom line for me is simply that you can't talk about the bureaucracy as this, big blob. You have to really be more specific.
Okay.
Okay. The question is broad, but I think it's a good question because it gets to the heart of what government is. And there's been some talk today about benevolent government, about good government. But the fact of the matter is that government is force. The only reason anyone does anything the government says is because the government can force you to do it. The government can put you in jail if you don't do it. And although we always strive for benevolent, positive government, once a group of people takes power, it is human nature. They will want to expand that power. They will want to make that power grow. And pretty soon you see government getting into the lives of individuals and taking away their money and using force to back up the things that they want to do. And so the Libertarians are unique because Democrats, they like to social engineer from the left. Republicans tend to want to social engineer from the right. We believe the only way to have a truly stable society where our freedoms are ensured is if we have limited government from both the left and the right.
Thank you. Roger?
Well, Ron, that's what my candidacy is about. What I realize that these agencies are out of control, and like the other candidates, they do not have the legal background and experience that I have. And where you're supposed to be checking this excess is in the courtrooms. Our Constitution makes the citizens, we are the sovereign authority. The government are elected public employees that have an oath to carry out, and what they're doing is they are flagrantly violating that oath. And the citizens are not allowed to get into the courtroom. Recently now, we've been going into these courtrooms, and finally now, just through our presence, our numbers, we are forcing these judges now to become what they are intended to be, and that is fair and impartial judges. Not because they want to be, but because we're forcing them to be. So that's how you check this government abuse in the courtrooms.
Bill?
Americans think that they're free. Because they can get up and say anything they want. They can curse their government, they can curse their favorite politician or least favorite politician. But if you were to ask a dictator, would you like to come to America and be dictator here? Here's the rules. People get to go to any church they want to go to. They get to say anything they want. They can curse you to your face, whatever they want to do. But you can tax away half of their money. You can tell them what they can do with their own property, whether they can cut down the shrubs on their own property. You can take their children away from them if they just spank their children. You can tell them whether they can build a deck on the back of their house or not. He'd say, that's a great deal. I'd love to be a dictator in that country. I don't care. The people can say whatever they want. In this country, and especially in Oregon, Oregonians are losing their freedoms. And government's becoming too big, too powerful, and too intrusive. And we need government. Government is not inherently evil, but we must recognize, as Richard said, government is indeed force.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm going to switch to a couple of other sort of issues. And since somebody, I think you just mentioned shrubs and everything, I think it's time to go on to the environment. And again, these are very broad questions, but we only have an hour, so I'm just trying to touch the bases as quickly as I can. Let's see, I believe it's your turn. What sort of programs would you implement to protect our forest, our streams, our quality of living in Oregon?
I think most Oregonians support clean air and clean water and protecting our forests and our beaches and just the beautiful things that make Oregon what it is. But the one element that needs to be injected into the environmental question in Oregon is the question of balance. And that is, in saving water and forests and all that we do, or saving owls or different types of fish, that do we indeed also show our respect for the impacts those environmental policies have on the lives of real everyday people and their jobs. I think Measure 64, which Blair said he supports, is an extreme, almost crazy measure that would have huge, devastating impact on the lives of a lot of Oregonians all across the state. Shut down, in fact, the livelihoods of entire communities almost. And what I think we need to do is continue to protect our environment, but also continue to respect private property rights, and to show that indeed that we recognize and are willing to consider the impact of environmental policy on the economic livelihood of everyday people.
Okay. Sure.
Well, what I'm seeing is that they're using these regulations, saying that we need a clean environment, to come in and police, state regulate the citizens. For example, this Savage Rapid Dam down in Grants Pass, they're saying that the endangered species, that it blocks the flow of fish. I was down at a hearing. They brought up 100 citizens from Grants Pass who live in the area who will be devastated if they take it out. And there was no credible evidence, Ron, to suggest that this was blocking any fish runs. Yet they were using that. Judge Hogan down there said that dam is going to have to come out. Now, there's a hidden agenda that's going on, trying to drive citizens off of their property, taking their lands, and they're taking them private lands for public use without compensation. The Constitution says you cannot do it, and we're going to enforce that if we get into office.
Okay.
If you take a look at some of the worst ecologies around the world, Romania, Russia, Thailand, Brazil, where there's been deforestation, pollution, contamination, you'll find that they were controlled by the government. Indeed, even in the United States, parts of Montana and Wyoming have been devastated by government control of the ecology. What I'm saying here is that centralized control of the ecology is a bad idea, and that with the laws that have been passed, like reforestation laws, most private landowners have become good stewards of the land. Take a look at the dams we have along the Columbia River. That is a perfect instance of how the government can get you into a problem and now cannot get you out. Sure, I support doing whatever we can to help the salmon, such as the new turbines, new screens, whatever, but I am not going to destroy local economies for the sake of those dams. And I also oppose ballot measure 64.
I find it very strange, almost laughable, that Mr. Sizemore and Widener are worried about, in the area of assisted suicide, the government forcibly taking life from people, when they support environmental policies that do the same thing. As Blair pointed out, we've had landslides caused by clear cuts, because clear cuts are legal in Oregon, that have taken people's lives. We have a Department of Environmental Quality that has very lax environmental standards, and this has adversely caused sickness and death among Oregon's people. So I would just say they should learn to be a little more consistent. If you're really concerned about life, then we need to have very, very strong environmental guidelines. And one of those things is Measure 64, which I support wholeheartedly.
Logging is just one of many issues in terms of our environment. I do support ballot measure 64. There are forest-dependent communities. The small town of Detroit used to be a mill town. Now the people have voted in that town to make water quality their #1 priority because they make money from tourists who come there and use the lake and fish and boat. But there's a number of other things. We need mass transit to cut down on air pollution. Commercial agriculture using petrochemicals pollutes the Willamette River. That's one of the major causes. Urban runoff, pollution from farms and logging all pollutes our drinking water. Trucks account for 43% of the air pollution in Portland. So we need to move goods and services by rails. We need to increase mass transit, bike paths. The Pacific Party is the only party that's really talking about a path to ecological sanity. Mr. Sizemore and Mr. Kitzhaber will take us to ecological destruction, one faster than the other.
Okay. And I'm trying to think. I think it's about your turn to come back around this time. Okay, very good. It's interesting you mentioned a light rail because that's just what I was going to go to next. Do you favor light rail as a solution to handle the Portland area, the metro area, and Vancouver doesn't matter. This gets the Portland area's transportation problem?
I think it's one component of a number of solutions. I think light rail is effective. I think that we have to look at using existing rail lines. Most of the cost from using light rail or creating it comes from building new trains, new tracks. So I think we need to look at using existing tracks. We have to discourage automobile use. I drive my car because it's cheap and it's easy to do it. Maybe we should have pay at the pump insurance so that when you drive, you have to pay more for insurance, or you pay for insurance, and that's an incentive to not drive your car. I think we need different incentives to get us out of our automobiles, to walk, to use bikes, and to use different forms of mass transit. We shouldn't be so provincial. We can look around the world and see it works great in a number of other places.
Okay.
Actually, I just have a very simple answer to that. That yes, I'm very much in favor of light rail, and in fact, while I think it would help out Portland, I'd like to see it stretch from Seattle to Ashland.
Okay.
Okay. You know, listen to these solutions. They're government solutions, government telling us how we should live our lives and what kind of lifestyle we should lead. I don't think that's the right answer. Now, mass transit is important. Reducing congestion is important. But there are other things that we can do that don't involve government telling us how to live our lives. One example of that is just more buses. Buses are very effective, they're mobile, you can change routes fast, and they're much cheaper than rail. How about tax credits for telecommuters, people doing data entry over the internet? How about things like private jitneys, airport-style limousines that are computer dispatched, like they use in Philadelphia? Or maybe mixed-use zoning so that people don't have to go as far or go on arterial roads to go to their work or their law office or whatever it happens to be. There are so many alternatives to light rail that are attractive, that don't cost tax money, and at the same time lets people live the lifestyle they want rather than have government tell them how to live.
Roger?
Well, I'm obviously in favor of mass transit. What I've seen about light rail is that it's an economic boondoggle. The dollars that are going into that for the benefit that they're receiving, it just don't match up. I saw some figures that showed on Banfield, after they put in light rail, that the number of cars actually increased because the feeder systems into the light rail were delaying people's trip time to Portland so that they were not using the light rail. So I'm against, I think light rail in the abstract is a nice idea. I think its practical application in Portland has not been prudent or cost effective. I think there's a hidden agenda again there that's not being talked about. I am in favor of this private jitney operation that would cut down on the cost.
Bill?
I believe that light rail is the biggest pork barrel boondoggle project to ever come along in the state of Oregon. The cost, about $130 million a mile to build it. People that use mass transit are such a tiny percentage of the population. In fact, if you take all of the transportation dollars in the Tri-County area combined, we spend about 77% of the total transportation dollars on a mass transit system, buses and light rail, used by 2.8% of the population. So 77% of the money for 3% of the people, as we have been trying to force people out of their cars. I think that people have a right to drive their cars. I think we ought to build the roads so that they can do so without being in gridlock and congestion. And this fall, when you vote in just a couple weeks on the measure on light rail, South-North light rail, I hope people recognize that after all the work we've done to limit the growth of property taxes to only 3% per year, if that light rail project passes, we're looking at about a 20% increase in property taxes in the Tri-County area.
Okay, and I'm going to go into another question that I think is very worth going into. A question. These next three questions are related, and I think it's going to work out pretty good. The low-cost housing shortage in the metro area in Multnomah County, where we're getting to be like LA, where working people, some working people wind up living in their cars, where so many, where so many people just cannot afford decent housing for themselves and their family, even though they may be working very hard. And what's the way to provide low-cost housing? Roger, I'll let you lead off with this one.
Well, I know that there's a lot of, my parents are, my mother's 88, 93, they've lived in this neighborhood 63 years. There's a lot of people that are living in these communities, single elderly people that have way more house than they need. I would suggest that we encourage them to create apartments in those homes so that you could provide a low-cost housing base. I simply don't know how you provide public housing and keep out of the boondoggle aspect of it, and that's what I see over and over again that I'm so leery of. I think one of the ways is just to create apartments in existing homes.
Well, there are three things I'd do. First of all, get rid of the urban growth boundary. If you're going to just arbitrarily draw a circle around a city and say that you're not going to grow beyond it, it's an illusion, first of all, because eventually people will expand the urban growth boundary. But what it does is it drives up costs of housing within that boundary, and that's something that we can take care of right away. The second thing is to reduce regulation and privatize some of the regulatory process. I've had developers tell me that regulation adds 20 to 30% of the cost of a new home. Now, if we do things like privatize inspections and streamline the regulatory process, we can reduce that cost somewhat and bring housing down as well. But also, getting rid of property taxes, replacing it with a capped 5% sales tax will help too, because every time an apartment owner improves his apartment, his assessment goes up, he pays more taxes, and he has to pass it down to rent. That practice needs to stop.
Good.
For years, you would have found that a socialist would have answered this question, well, we just need to put more money into public housing. But actually, that's not the problem. The problem is that builders and developers are just too damn greedy. If you look, I live in Salem. They're always talking about, you know, what Richard's talking about, relaxing regulations and stuff. But what it comes down to is every time they build houses for the wealthy. You know, I think we almost need to require development companies, if they want to build houses in our county or our city, that about 35% of what they build must be houses for people within a certain income level.
Oh, very good. Well,
I think that part of the problem is not so much that the developers are greedy, which, you know, this is a capitalist system, so that's what they're there for. They're there to make money. There we go, finally, camera. Problem is that the government, that we the taxpayers, are subsidizing the development just like we the taxpayers subsidize the timber companies. What I'd like to see is some of the conservatives here, so-called conservatives, get upset about the fact that we the taxpayers are subsidizing these corporations, subsidizing developers, subsidizing the timber companies, subsidizing the U.S. Forest Service. When developers are forced to pay their own costs, then we'll see a whole different change in the housing market. When we stop giving huge tax breaks to out-of-state corporations to come here, which drives up housing prices, because then we get more people coming from out-of-state to take higher-paying jobs, it's a spiraling, escalating deal. What we need to do is control growth and stop subsidizing.
okay. Bill?
If you say you don't believe in the law of gravity and you walk up to a cliff and you step over the edge, you will find out that the law of gravity is real, whether you believe in it or not. You will fall to the bottom. Well, the law of supply and demand is just as real. And you don't break it, you end up following it. It will break you if you ignore it. The reason why housing costs so much, and the reason why there is so little affordable housing in the Portland area, is that we have artificially, as Richard Burke said, drawn a circle around the city, and we've limited the amount of land that's available for building houses on. When you limit the supply, and the demand is there, the price will go up. And so we don't have affordable housing, even though there's a market for affordable housing, and because we have an urban growth boundary that is limiting the amount of land that's available for development. And Trey, that's why the developers are putting expensive houses on those pieces of land rather than cheap houses, is because there's such a limited amount of land that they can only justify putting an expensive house on that property. That is the law of supply and demand, and folks, it works.
Bill, you're running over there a little bit. Okay. Well, you know, my second question, you just got into my second question, which is urban growth boundaries. Do you feel that they contribute to the high cost of housing in the metro area? And since you brought it up, I think it's fair to let everybody take a crack at that. So I think this time we're going to start with...
Me?
Yeah.
Well, I think I've already talked about the urban growth boundary some. There are a lot of things you have to take into account. If you draw a circle around a town and say you're only going to grow within this circle, you create density. And density comes with some downfalls. First of all, crime always goes up. Whenever you increase density within an area, you're going to have more crime. If you have more crime, you have a lot of other social problems. You have broken families, you have a lot of problems. And as we've already discussed, you have high-priced housing because of the law of supply and demand, which, as Bill has said, is a law that you cannot ignore. So the urban growth boundary, it's just not a good idea. It doesn't work. We always end up having to change it anyway. It makes much more sense to do something that does not cause the problems I've cited, nor does it create environmental pressures on the green spaces within the boundary.
Trey?
I'm very much in favor of the urban growth boundaries because we have valuable cropland, we have valuable forests, and if you don't have an urban growth boundary, pretty soon they will not exist. And also to answer something that Bill Sizemore brought up, I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, which has numerous tracts of land available. And Kansas City, Missouri has the same problem as Salem, Oregon. The developers come in, they build the houses for the rich because that's where they get their most of their money, and they have as much of a housing problem there as we do here in Oregon. So the problem is not with these regulations, it's the problem that under capitalism, our developers just want to make as much money as they possibly can and basically screw the little people.
Okay, Blair?
I love these little forms. They're so colorful, aren't they? I support the urban growth boundary. The alternative, 2 words, Los Angeles. You know, I don't think anybody would trade the lifestyle that we have, those cities that we have, the countryside that we have for a look at Southern California. That's what happens when you don't have an urban growth boundary. So yes, I support the urban growth boundary, as Trey pointed out. It helps to protect farmland, it helps protect small businesses. All the people that we see crying on these ads against Measure 64, they'd be put out of business if if we do away with the urban growth boundary. So I support it. There's other methods. We can do more infill, more density, and I disagree with Richard. You know, I don't think those automatically turn into social ills. A lot of other cities around the world work just fine.
Thank you, Blair. Bill?
The whole concept of an urban growth boundary is supposedly there to preserve prime farmland. And Oregonians have decided they want to protect prime farmland. Well, the fact of the matter is, go up in an airplane and look at the urban growth boundary and look at the area in Portland and inside the UGB, and you will see that there are thousands of acres of undeveloped prime farmland, which will end up mostly being developed because of the UGB. When outside the urban growth boundary, there is all kinds of land, which is called secondary land, which because of its type of soil or terrain or slope, it's not conducive to farming. It's not prime farmland. So rather than force all the density inside the urban growth boundary and ruin the livability of our existing communities, I propose that we identify land outside the UGB that is in fact secondary non-prime farmland, and we let development occur there. Not just use up all of our farmland, but I think that kind of policy, a secondary lands policy, preserves prime farmland both outside the urban growth boundary and inside the urban growth boundary.
Roger?
Well, I agree with Bill on that issue. And what I'm opposed to is this layering of government. When you have this urban growth boundary, we have Metro that is in there regulating people's lives. And I think, and they're micromanaging it. And I'm opposed to that urban growth boundary for that reason. And I support, again, what Mr. Sizemore just said.
Okay, gentlemen, I think we have to go into 1-minute statements now. We'll come out pretty good. So let's just take about, does anybody want to go first? Anybody want to volunteer?
I'll go first.
You do?
Yeah.
Okay, so your 1-minute summations. Roger, go ahead.
Yes. Well, as I told you, the reason that I'm running for governor is to restore to the citizens of this state their constitutional rights of equal protection and due process of law that I've seen stripped out of our system. I've been going into courts with people, forcing these judges to obey the law. I was down in Salem recently, in the state capitol here, and I was confronting Wallace Carson, the Chief Justice of the Oregon Supreme Court, about the corruption that's going on in our system with 30 outraged citizens. I've seen none of the other candidates anywhere near these courtrooms. So I am literally in the trenches forcing these judges simply to follow the law, people. When the government fears the people, you have liberty. When people fear the government, you have tyranny. And so the only way that I found to force them to observe our rights, we are the sovereign citizens in this state, not the government, is to obey the Constitution and to confront them and demand our rights. Thank you.
I think I offer the voters of Oregon the only real alternative to John Kitzhaber. As the Republican nominee, I offer solutions, common sense solutions to the problems in the state that are not John Kitzhaber solutions of just raising taxes and throwing more money at problems. For example, our schools, the governor thinks that they can solve all their problems if we'll just give them more of our money. I believe that if we would put discipline back in our schools so that teachers have the authority to deal with disruptive students, and if we had phonics back in our schools so kids would learn how to read by the 1st or 2nd grade, we get our curriculum focused back on the basics, we can do more good for our children, more good for our schools than a whole truckload of money. And that's what I'll do as your governor. Ladies and gentlemen, I will do my best to make government work for you, delivering you your money's worth for all the taxes you're already paying.
Blair.
Well, I think that the number one concern of Oregonians today is quality of life. Clean air, clean water, livability, not having sprawl, not having too much congestion, and those are the issues that I address. Take a good look at the voters pamphlet or check out our website at www.pacificparty.org. Harry Lonsdale, former Democratic candidate for the U.S. Senate, has endorsed my campaign. David Brower, former executive director of the National Sierra Club, has endorsed my campaign. And there's reasons why. We are addressing the real issues that people focus on here in Oregon, that they're concerned about. The Pacific Party, Oregon's Green Party, is the mainstream. We believe in the same things that you do, taking care of our environment, limited government, we're independent, we're concerned about the future. The only wasted vote is voting for a candidate that you don't believe in. Democracy is about choices. Choices is about freedom. Make your choice a meaningful one. Please vote Pacific on November 3rd.
Okay. Trey?
And continuing on with Blair's line here, I would say that democracy is also about making informed decisions. And so I would suggest you go up to Project Vote Smart, League of Women Voters website, read your voters pamphlet. I mean, really read it. Read it to see what all of us here are talking about, and then make your decision. I can say, if I were elected as your next governor, the agenda of the Socialist Party is to make our tax system more progressive, to rein in the power of corporate Oregon by reformulating the charter process, which basically would give power over corporations to the people of the state, not the other way around, to do away with the Oregon Health Plan and replace it with state-regulated single-payer health insurance, and finally to do away with the Oregon State Lottery, which is nothing more than a backdoor tax on the poor and middle class. And actually, if I was just looking at the statistics, almost as much money comes in for the Oregon Lottery as does for the corporations of this state paying taxes. So I think if you're looking for a progressive vision, for a vision different from capitalism, the Socialist Party is the obvious choice.
Thank you. Richard?
It's been a privilege to campaign this year with Bill Sizemore, John Kitzhaber, and the other gentlemen who've represented their respective parties. I think we've provided a good selection of choices for the voters of Oregon. What I offer you, though, is unique, in that John Kitzhaber, if he is reelected, he will take your money, basically. He supports high taxes, he supports regulation, he'll tell you what to do with your property and your money. And Bill Sizemore, although he's a fantastic guy, he will support policies which do, in my opinion, make incursions on your personal choices, when you would live, when you would die, and abortion and medicinal marijuana, other issues. I'm the only choice you have in this election if you want government out of your private life as well as your pocketbook. And given the dynamics of the race this year, this is a good race to send a message to Salem, to say, look, we know why you're there. We want you to protect us and protect our schools, protect our civil liberties. But I don't want you in my private life, and I don't want you in my pocketbook. And I think that voting for me this year, it's a vote in political innovation. It tells Salem that you want them out of your life as much as possible. Thank you.
Okay, very good. I want to thank everybody for coming here today. I know a lot of you had very busy schedules and you changed them to make it here. I'm sorry we didn't get started quite as quick as we would like to, but we did have problems. And I thank you for your patience. And I thank you for being here. It was a pleasure, and I hope to see you all again sometime. Thank you.
Thank you.